Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Scoreboard Keepers. I am the host, the RAF, and we'll be right back in 30 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you to the Scoreboard Keepers. You're around here, we keep the seats, we keep the score. So if you want to get on the board, make your point. If it makes sense, we'll add it to the board. If it don't, we won't. Scoreboard Keepers.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Scoreboard Keepers. I am your host, the REF, where I keep you up to score and everything sports, hip hop, and hot topics. Big aviation scare last night, ladies and gentlemen. Big aviation scare. The Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, C-32, declared an in-flight emergency over the Atlantic last night. Instead of heading home to D.C., the jet diverted to RAF Mildenhall in the U.K. Everybody, all the people on board are safe, but the implications were crazy. It was something very serious, and it could have been, it could have been a deadly situation. The aircraft, U.S. Air Force C-32, is the military version of a Boeing 757. So you guys all see that right here. It's used to transport senior officials. It departed Brussels after a NATO meeting, and about 30 minutes into the transatlantic leg, a crack in the cockpit windshield was detected. Pilots declared an emergency. Squawk 7700 began a descent to 10,000 feet and diverted to RAF Mildenhall. It was overlapped by a KC-135T Stratotanker escort during the descent. Pentagon spokesman Sean Parnell confirms standard procedures followed and there was no injuries. So this thing, it had to be accompanied by a KC-135T, a Stratotanker, to escort this thing during its descent. So this thing had to be very, very, very serious. And I'm pretty sure all on board had to be frightened to a certain extent, man. You're nothing below you but water, so it had to be a very serious thing. Hegseth himself posted, "All good, thank God, continue the mission." So he must be in pretty good spirits to be on some solid ground this morning. This kind of mechanical emergency, especially a windshield crack, is rare, but it can be extremely serious in high altitude flights. The decision to divert shows the protocol was actually, it actually worked. Whatever they did, I'm pretty sure this will be recommended to everybody that would get into this type of situation and take safety over urgency, because wherever he was going, it couldn't have been that important, to get there over his safety and his, his overall health, well-being. And that goes for everybody on board. He's not the only one on there. Those pilots, they have families, and everybody else on there has families, but he was the, this trip was pretty much about him, obviously. But it raises all kinds of questions, like how old is this airplane? How rigorous is the maintenance on a VIP aircraft? And given the timing, a post-NATO dialogue, there are some speculations that might emerge, but we're going to avoid the conspiracies over here, and just stick to the facts. The transparency from the Pentagon helps, a quick update is better than the silence that they can sometimes give you in these scenarios. And I mean, sometimes you don't know what's going on. They just will say mum's the word, but having a crack in your windshield that high, that's unusual. Like, how did that happen? And it had to happen after, it happened after the NATO meeting. So apparently it was all good before they got there. And then it all of a sudden happened on the way back. We're going to stay away from the conspiracies, but it does raise some kind of eyebrows. Compared to past high-level emergency landings, this is the show precedent. You know what I'm saying? So this thing could have ended up in the water for sure. The media is always going to react to this. They hear something like that, and their headlines are saying Hegseth's plane diverted after a windshield crack emergency over the Atlantic. Aviation watchers are probing flights now, tracking the data of altitude changes and any type of descent curves. So they're watching everything now to make sure all these things stay in the sky. And what was so funny is I just heard this plane going over top of where I am right now, and it was super, super loud, and it sounded like it was super, super low. For a plane to sound, this wasn't your average plane that I heard. This wasn't it didn't sound like a commercial plane. But as low as it was loud. Like it was so loud that I had to get up and look out the window just to see what it was. Because the place was shaking, and I'm looking and I'm like, that sounds pretty low. I'm like, man, is this thing going to hit the house? Is it going to hit the place? Like, what's going to happen? Some skeptics, that are out there now that the media is all involved, they pushing political move narratives. That's what they're always going to come up with now, especially with him being out there, in NATO and Brussels and speaking to everybody, everybody thinking that, there's foes everywhere right now, no allies. That's how everybody's feeling right now. So people are going to be they're going to be skeptical, and then others are applauding. I'm pretty sure his family members are, and everybody down there in the White House and in the government, they're applauding the protocol, no panic, safe landing. And then he's talking about continue the mission. So it's all good. They say VIP travel, it ain't all glamour. It's a high risk operation. That's a pretty long flight, and this incident proves that the top defense brass can't bypass engineering limits. Losing a windshield that high with the people that's actually driving, that's steering your plane, man, that could have been disastrous. It goes on to say, reports say if Hegseth's jet had failed mid-ocean, it would have been a crisis. So thank protocol for preventing that. This event will fuel calls to re-examine the age and safety standards of U.S. government aircraft, which I totally agree. It's no telling how old that thing is. It doesn't look like it's the newest plane in the world, but I'm pretty sure it probably has some miles on it. They're going to go over that thing with a fine-tooth comb now, though. Politically, they say they nailed that the PR response, fast confirmation, calm messaging, and we all know that that's crisis 101. You want to get at it. SNORE, ladies and gentlemen, like aircraft integrity, maintenance oversight. I got to go with a SNORE, because how the hell are you all the way in Brussels and you got a crack in your windshield? This ain't like no damn crack in the car. You going 50, 60 miles an hour down the road, and and you got that little spider going up in your front windshield. You up 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 feet in the air, and you got a crack in the windshield. It's zero room for errors up there. So I'm going to go with a SNORE. That's definitely not a score there. That's a SNORE. The pilot crew in response and protocol, they get 3 points. Okay. They get 3 points. I'm just going to give them 3 points. Their response and their protocol and their emergency awareness, because they could have all out panicked in that situation. You hear what I'm telling you? You see a crack in that windshield, everybody, your front line, you're looking right at this. If that windshield cracks, it's blowing right in their faces at 30,000 feet in the air. That could have been solid execution. Solid. They get 3 points. The pilots and the crew, the response and the protocol, superb. Pentagon transparency. They get a point because they could have lied. They get a point. Let's give them a point because they could have lied to us. They could have told us anything, and they could have been, playing in, the secret role, and they could have been just going on about their business, saying, "Look, it's not any of your business, so don't worry about it." But they didn't. They were transparent. and they kept it real with us, and you got to give them a point for that, because normally they don't speak about things like this. They keep this thing kind of in-house, Secret Service and all of that. They don't know what's going on. They don't know where that crack came from. And I'm pretty sure they probably went over that plane before it left, but they definitely going to go over it now. Hegseth public composure, I'm going to give him a point. I got to get a man a point, because he said, continue the mission. So obviously he wasn't, he's okay mentally and physically. I'm pretty sure he's thanking God for that, because this could have been a disaster situation, man. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that plane right there, you go up there and you get in those cans, man. We call them cans around here, man. You go up there and get up in there, you got somebody else's, somebody else has your life in their hands. And you're up there and you're flying because you're taking care of business. But when an emergency comes, you want to make sure that the right people are there that's going to have the right response to whatever it is you're going through. And it takes professionals to do that. And you got to have a lot of confidence to put your life into somebody's hands. So kudos goes out to those pilots, man. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't already, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thumb up the video, turn on your notification bell, and leave some comments down below on how you guys feel about flying in general. How do you guys feel about this incident here? And how do you guys feel about how the pilots responded to a potential crisis? I think they did a wonderful job, man. I think they actually did a phenomenal job. When you can come out of this without anything catastrophic happening, it's a win. So I'm curious to see what you guys have to say down in the comments. I'm definitely going to respond back and chime in with my comments as well. And I just want to say, Mr. Hegseth, thank God that everybody's healthy. You and everybody that was on that plane. And I'm pretty sure you probably got on your knees and said a prayer after that, because like I said, landing in water with a broken windshield is not a positive outcome. That's not what you want. And thank God, these guys were able to remedy this situation, because this conversation could have been different to this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, until the next episode of the Scoreboard Keepers, I am your host, the Ref. God bless. Peace.